All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD1111 Database-Driven Web Development class, I'm creating a series of video presentations, most of which are based on some of the handbooks in the Valley of Code website by Mr. Flavio Copes. I've done several, and I'm in the middle of the Express handbook right now, and I shouldn't even say the middle. I'm about a third of the way through. And the next thing to talk about in here is CORS. All right. It says how to allow cross-site requests by setting up CORS. A JavaScript application running in the browser can usually access only HTTP resources from the same domain that serves them. Loading images, scripts, CSS files, etc. from the same origin usually works. All right. However, using XHR and fetch calls to an external third-party server typically will fail. That is unless the third-party server implements a mechanism to allow the connection to be made and the requested resources be downloaded and used. That mechanism, as mentioned there, is called CORS, Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. If I click on here, I don't know exactly where that's supposed to bring me. But one important thing is that CORS needs ES modules, recently introduced in modern browsers. If you don't set up a CORS policy on the server that allows it to serve third-party origins, the request will fail. This is one of those things that you at least have to have a fundamental understanding of. All right. And the way I look at it is if you want to be able to go across domains, there might be some setup work that has to be done. All right. Fetch example. Fetch failed because of CORS policy. XHR example. Same thing. So a cross-origin resource fails if it's to a different domain or subdomain, different port or protocol. It says CORS is there for your security, and that's the truth. It wants to protect the equivalent of spoofing when malicious users try to make it look like you're doing one thing when you're really doing something else. As it says there, if you control both the server and the client, you know the parties are trustworthy, and therefore you have good reason to allow resource sharing. How do you do that? It depends on your server-side stack. All right, and it says browser support for a CORS is pretty good, except for Internet Explorer less than version 10. So let's look here. It says if you're using Node.js and Express, you want to use the CORS middleware package. Here's an example. So this is without CORS. It says if you hit the without CORS with a fetch request from a different origin, it's going to raise a CORS issue right there. All you need to do to make things work smoothly is to require the CORS package linked above and pass it in as middleware to the function. So we're adding it here. All right. And we're passing it in there. Okay, let's go back, and as we have done several times in here, let's go to here and npmjs.org, and let's put in CORS. Node.js CORS middleware. And again, you'll notice 8 million plus downloads weekly. Again, it has its own repo and its own homepage. So the idea with all this, and there's a lot of stuff to go through here, but if you want to learn what it's about, how to use it, etc., this is a good starting point. This is a place to go if you're fortunate enough upon graduation to get an interview to, let's say, be a full stack developer. All right. Again, there's the usage, configuring it, how it's configured, etc. So he said he made a glitch example. So click show to see your app. Yeah. Well, since I've done virtually nothing with glitch, I'm not going to be much help right there. So note how the request that fails does so because the server does not handle course headers correctly. Okay, as you can see in the network panel, where you can see the message that was sent. Okay. As it says, you can still run into problems. Here, any request will be accepted by the server as cross-origin. All right. Basically, that's a wildcard character. You need to configure the server to only allow one origin to serve and block all others. Using the same CORS node library, this is how you do it. All right. I've taught this class. This will be maybe the third or fourth time I've taught it. We've done virtually nothing with CORS. I'd say read the section, get from here what you can get out of it. Okay. All right. Pre-flight. There are some requests that are handled in a simple way. All GET requests belong to this group. Some POST and HEAD requests do as well. All other requests must run through a pre-approval phase called pre-flight. I've never even heard of this before. The browser does this to determine if it has permission to perform an action by issuing an options request. A pre-flight request contains a few headers that the server will use to check permission. Again, I've not seen this before. All right. Express is capable of handling server-side template engines. Template engines allow you to add data to a view and to generate HTML dynamically. Now, the ones that are in here, the ones I believe they will discuss, all right, are Jade, which was formerly, I believe, let's see, the name was changed from Jade to Pug in 2016. You can still use Jade, although Pug, okay, so Pug. And they go in here, and we're not going to use Pug, so I'm going to skip this. Handlebars, which I have taught before in the past. All right. You'll notice when you start using this, there'll be a bunch of curly braces. I'm wondering if they're going to have a thing in here on, they don't have a thing on EJS, all right, which is basically extended JavaScript. But all right. You can install handlebars like this, and it's a little confusing because if you do go out here and we go back to the Node Package Manager and you put in handlebars, there's handlebars, there's Express handlebars, there's other ones, and the latest and greatest is just HBS. All right, notice there's also an Express HBS and a few other ones. That's the one I typically have used. And you come in here and you put in, you basically have to go and set up a mechanism that will hold your static files, those being your HTML files, your CSS files, your image files, and your server-side, your browser-side JavaScript files. All right. So I'm not going to say any more about that than that. All right. Middleware. Middleware, as mentioned here, is a function that hooks onto the routing process. It's something that's in the middle. So it's in between typically your application and built-in things in the language that you want to use. It is commonly used to edit the request or response object or terminate a request. If you write your own middleware, and I think we've mentioned this before, you need to pass in the request object, you need to pass in the response object, and you need to put a next parameter in there. And then at the end, I don't know if they're even there, you put in this, which says, okay, we're finished. Go on now. All right. So as it says, this is similar to defining a route, but in addition to the request and response, you have a reference to the next middleware function. We always call next at the end of our middleware function in order to pass the execution to the next handler, unless you want to prematurely end the response and send it back to the client. And that's what they're showing here. All right. How to serve static assets directly from a folder in Express. You've seen some of this already. As it says here, it's common to have images, CSS, and more in a public subfolder and then expose them at the root level. What does that mean? Right here, that's basically what this is saying, that your static files will be contained in a folder called public. If you have an index.html file in public, that's the one that'll be served when you hit the root domain automatically. Express rather provides a method to transfer a file as an attachment. That's response.download. Sessions. How to use sessions to identify users across requests. As it says, by default, Express requests are sequential. No request is linked to another request. In other words, if a request comes into a server from a client, then another request comes into the server from the same client. Typically, the server has no idea that they're coming from the same machine. So users typically, as it says here, are not identified unless using some kind of mechanism to make it possible, and that's what sessions are. When implemented, every user of your API will be assigned a unique session, typically referred to as a session ID. We'll use the Express Session module to do that. You can install it here, require it, and here it says you can set this up. After this is done, all the requests to the app routes are now using sessions. Secret is the only required parameter, but there are many more you can use. I again believe, and I could be wrong here, this is probably something you'd want to put into an environment file so no one else would be able to look at that. All right. It says, where is session data stored? Depends on how you set up the Express Session module. It can be stored in memory, in a database, or in a cache. Again, I've done very, very little with that. What Copes is doing here, in my humble opinion, is trying to go through this and give you an overall view of Express, how it's used, what's in here, etc. So some of the stuff that's shown in here we will use. Some of the stuff that's shown in here we will not use. All right. Validating input says, say you have a post endpoint that accepts the name, email, and age parameters. All right. How do you perform server-side validation on the results to make sure, as an example, name is 3 or more characters, email is a real email. And all we're saying here with name is a real email is, remember what we're saying there is, hey, was this formatted as a legitimate email? That's all we're saying there. All right. And that age is a number between 0 and 110. The best way to handle validation of any kind of input coming from outside Express is by using the Express Validator package. So you can go in and you can make some checks. And here they're showing the checks All right. Will we be doing this? The answer is yes, but probably not using the Express validator. All right. What I've always done in the past is I've held off on talking about validation until we get into where we're working with databases, especially when we work with MongoDB. Okay. So the ones they use here is length with a minimum of 3, is email, and is numeric. And as you can see here, there are a bunch of other ones as well. You can also validate data against regular expressions. All right, it says you've seen how to validate input that comes in from the outside world to your Express app. There's one thing you quickly learn when you run a public-facing server: never trust the input. And that's true. Regardless of where the input is coming from, never trust it. That's why one of the things that we talked about in the AWD1111 Web Development Technologies class is typically when you've got a form, you validate your form input on the client side. If anything fails, you never even send it over to the server side, because why make it do a round trip where if there's bad information and you know already, why send it to the server where it'll be sent back anyway? But even with that said, typically what happens is you run a series of validation tests on client-side data. If they pass and you send it to the server, you either run the same tests on the server or similar ones written for the server. And that is sanitizing input. Even if you sanitize and make sure people can't enter weird things, you'll still be subject to people using tools to post directly to your endpoints. People doing things they shouldn't do. Sometimes people will do things like that because they are being malicious. Other times they just try things, or they get put someplace accidentally, or they're just curious as to what would happen. So the Express Validator package, it says you already used to validate input, can also perform sanitization. So they showed this previously. So notice this. If we're going to post, all right, from that form, what we're trying to do is we're trying to grab what was put into that form in the name and put that into a variable called name. In the email, put it into a variable called email. And the age in a variable called age. And then we looked at this to make sure, so we added basically the is length, is numeric, etc. So rather than just accept it, we told it to check this. And if it succeeds, then do this. So they say here, you can add sanitization by piping the sanitization methods after the validation ones. And it looks like, well, geez, why are you doing all this stuff? Because about the worst thing that you can do is to allow bad data into your system. All right. All right. So here's some sanitization methods. Here, as it says, you can force conversion to a certain kind of format. All right. So let's see if we can finish this up. How to process forms using Express. It says this is an example of an HTML form. This is the kind of thing that we did when we had our client-side AWD1000 class. So we've got form, the method was post, the action is submit form, and you'll notice there's a text box in there for username and a submit button. Okay. When the user presses the submit button, the browser will automatically make a post request to submit form. The URL on the same origin of the page. The browser sends the data encoded in the form URL encoded. All right, and it says in this example, it'll hold the username. Forms can also send data using the get method, but the vast majority will use post. The form data will be sent in the post request body. To extract it, you will need to use the express.url encoded right there, that middleware. And I've mentioned previously that when I've done this in the past, it seems to not matter if I put that extended to be true or false. Now you need to create a post endpoint and work with any data that comes in. And of course, as it says, make sure you validate. All right. File uploads informs how to manage storing and handling files uploaded via forms. And they give an example. This is pretty much the same one that we looked at before, except the encryption type rather is been added. All right. And we're putting in a file called document. When the user presses the submit button, the browser will automatically make a post request, send the data contained but not encoded as a normal form. Not encoded as a normal form, but as form data. Server side, as it says, working with multi-part data can be tricky and error prone, so they're using a utility library called Formidable, all right, to try to do the work. I'm not familiar with any of this stuff. That's why I'm flipping through this as fast as I am. All right, as we're finishing or winding down here, an Express HTTPS server with a self-signed certificate. To be able to serve a site on HTTPS, remember HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTPS is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. Okay. Says to be able to serve a site on HTTPS, you'll need to create a self-signed certificate. They go through the steps here. I have never done this. So again, why, I'm not going to sit there and read through the stuff when I have not done it before. All right. So it says there is a popular free solution called Let's Encrypt, and they go through what has to be done for that. Again, not having done it, I'm not going to waste your time. That pretty much should be everything. Now, that was a little poor, for lack of better words. So we're going to go through a couple of examples. What I'm doing is I'm kind of sort of butchering them, but I just want you to see this, and that is I have gone out here under YouTube, and the first thing that I did, and this is when I started learning this stuff. This is one of the first things that I did. All right, I need to watch that later. Okay, but is I went out to Brad Traversy, Node.js crash course. All right, and what he has shown in here, I watched this yesterday. I've watched it before. I watched most of this yesterday. I've watched it before. I'm going to watch this soon. I've watched it before. But in this Node.js crash course, amongst other things that are in here, what Mr. Traversy has is the code that he's used in here. That's under GitHub. So I'm grabbing this. I'm going to download it as a zip. I probably already have it downloaded. So if there's a number there, yep, I do. All right. And I'm going to take this Node crash course master1.zip, and I'm going to drag it over to my desktop and tell it to extract. And I'm just going to call it Node crash course. All right. So that should be here now. Right there. All right. And I'm going to right mouse click. In fact, let's close this that I was working on previously. All right. Let's right mouse click in here and do a git bash. And I don't know, I'll do an npm I to install all of his goodies. And let's look at his package.json file. That's not it. That is it. He's already got NodeMon set up, but I'm going to put it in anyway. So let's see. So we've got node and NodeMon. Okay, node index. So it's going to run this file right here. All right, I'm going to come and I'm going to explain this entire file to you in just a few minutes. But before we do, let me also do a node and install NodeMon. And I'm going to do a NodeMon index. All right, server is up and running on port 5000. So let's take a look there. All right, and it doesn't show much. Welcome to the home page. But I want to go over this. I'm going to take his index file, and I'd actually like to explain everything that he's got in here. Most everything that he's got in here, let's put it that way. Okay? So I'll be back to do that shortly.